Hey, are you tired of the left and right politics? I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click that subscribe button, ring the little bell, and prepare to free your mind from the traditional red versus blue. I don't know if the Problem Solvers Caucus has a theme song, but as I'm thinking about it, they could borrow mine because their mission statement seems to be in line with the purpose of this program. Congressman Josh Gottheimer and Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, Gottheimer from New Jersey, won't hold that against him. Fitzpatrick from the great state of Pennsylvania, both join me. They are the co-chairs of the Problem Solver Caucus. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Congressman Fitzpatrick, what exactly is the Problem Solver Caucus, and can any member of Congress join?
Yeah, we're essentially the only bipartisan group. It's a Noah's Ark rule. If you want to join, you have to find someone from the opposite party to join with you. Every bill we advance is bipartisan in nature. We sit together in the center at the State of the Union address. We do what we call district swaps, where we will go to each other's districts. We get to know each other's families. We build personal relationships, and we want to see each other succeed. And we just try to project that throughout Congress and throughout the country as what our country not only wants, but what they really need right now. So we try to lead by example. We don't attack each other. We don't campaign against each other. And we view each other's different perspectives as a strength that we need to harness, not a weakness to be criticized.
In other words, Congressman Fitzpatrick, the number always has to have parity. There always have to be the same number of R's and D's at the same time?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Congressman Gottheimer, what it sounds like is old school. It sounds like the way Congress used to be, that you would agree to socialize with one another. The Senate used to adhere, I don't know if they still do, that informally they would never go and campaign against another member of the U.S. Senate. Does it strike you as a throwback?
Well, it's, as you point out, it's the way it should be. You know, the 58 of us, the 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans, actually, believe it or not, think that the new way of fighting with each other, tweeting against each other, is the wrong way. And we think the way our founders wanted it was for us to actually get together, disagree, debate, which we do plenty of, don't worry, right? Brian's a proud Republican, I'm a proud Democrat. We still do those things, but at the end of the day, we think our job is to actually govern and move the country forward, and to put country ahead of party. And so in that way, I think it's a bit of a throwback these days, but I think it's what needs to happen if we're gonna reinstate people's faith in what we do in Washington and get things done, which ultimately is our job.
Congressman Gottheimer, what is required of a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus? I ask that because there's another group out there that caught my eye a few years ago, and I'll name them, No Labels. I thought that what they were seeking to do was on the right path. And then over time, I thought that some members had manipulated the situation in that they all wanted the No Labels label, but many didn't adhere to it. And I'm just trying to understand whether the same thing takes place at the Problem Solvers Caucus or whether you actually have to have skin in the game.
It's a great question. And by the way, No Labels is an outside group of citizens who believe deeply in what we're working on. And you know, we're in the Congress as a caucus, which means, just so for people who are listening, Democrats and Republicans can come together and form groups or around any issue. And that's what we've done here. And we have bylaws, and part of what our requirement is, one, you commit to actually getting together every week, as Brian, and often more than once a week when we're negotiating. It could take literally hundreds of hours. And whether you're talking about things like working on now on infrastructure or police reform or other issues like that, it means you stay in the room and you keep working at it. Two, you don't criticize other members in the caucus, right? You want to debate in the room, great. When you go out, we're respectful. We actually believe in civility. And we also commit to not just show up every week, but as Brian said, never to campaign against one another publicly. It'd be incredibly hard to build a trusting relationship, which is the ultimate goal, and getting to know each other's families and building that relationship. If, you walked out of the room and then campaigned against the person sitting next to you, you might imagine that would be a problem. So that means you don't write checks against them or, raise money against them or go in their district against them, which is a big commitment. And the most important commitment we make is when we get to 75% of us agreeing on something, on a policy matter, on a bill, we agree to stand together. And that's a very big commitment, right? We say we expect you to actually vote together in a block, unless there's some reason why you really can't do it, and you raise it and talk to the caucus about it. We expect you to all stand as a block. And you might imagine, when you got 435 members of Congress, when 58 of us stand together, that can be a pretty powerful statement and influence.
Well, I love the framework as you've described it. Congressman Fitzpatrick, let's apply this to some substantive issues. So what, for example, with regard to January 6th, has been the approach of the Problem Solvers Caucus?
We got involved in a big way, Michael. It was introduced by a Problem Solvers Caucus member. Our caucus endorsed it. So as Josh just described, we did hit that 75% threshold. So the caucus formally endorsed the bill, which was a big deal, by the way. It got a lot of news. And it manifested itself on the floor of the House with 35 Republican colleagues of mine joining us to vote for it, which sends a very loud message. So I don't know how we could have been more consequential with regard to that piece of legislation.
It has to be, Congressman Fitzpatrick, difficult for you in terms of those who occupy the social media platforms the most. The loudest voices are the ones who would be disapprove. I imagine this plays well for you. I know you, so I know that this is where your heart is, and I say that in a very good way. So I believe this is the real Brian Fitzpatrick. I also think it suits your district well. I was born and raised in your district, but I also know that the loudest voices who are out there are the ones who drive the dissension, and this probably angers them.
No doubt, Michael, and I know you know the feeling as well. Josh knows it, having both your left and right ribs bruised all day, every day. You're right. I mean, the loudest voices, the people that get all the media attention, are the ones that are saber rattling and throwing red meat to their quote unquote base. And, as we say in Congress, you have two types of members. You have your workhorses and your show horses. The show horses are the ones that don't have a whole lot of legislation to speak of. They're not the people like me and Josh that are meeting, for example, on police reform until, 10, 11 o'clock at night in a committee hearing room, with pizza and coffee in the room, with our sleeves rolled up, trying to get to a centrist position that we can actually move forward. These are the show horses are the ones that don't really have a legislative agenda. They're more entertainers than they are legislators. And that's what we're battling against, Michael. And the climate right now. It's tough to be a centrist and a moderate because it doesn't make headlines. And it doesn't, generate clicks and likes and retweets and shares on social media. And that's always what we're fighting against.
Who are these guys? And are they really members of Congress? Can this be happening? Congressman Gottheimer, in contrast to what Congressman Fitzpatrick just said, you think about those who come to town now and they say something incendiary, they try and get a lot of clicks, and all of a sudden they become fundraising magnets. I mean, that's the sad part about all this, right? You're running against that grain.
I mean, Michael, that's exactly right. And Fitz said this perfectly well, right? I mean, it is not the popular thing to do in terms of raising money and getting clicks. And you might imagine that you just get yelled at by both sides all the time, which to me on an average day means I'm probably doing something right. But you send a note out asking for $5 and say, listen, I'm working together with Brian Fitzpatrick. We're going to get this legislation across the finish line for the good of the country. That's not exactly what someone's hitting the click, give you $5. There's literally a whole complex built around sending these incendiary emails around all day long of like, now is the last moment. If you don't do this right now, the world will fall apart. And, I always say that, it's going to be a great day when we get to go to Washington, D.C. And I encourage people with my constituents and hold up signs that say, work together, get things done, right? And that to me is when we can disband the Problem Solvers Caucus, because hopefully we're just doing our jobs. But you're right, Michael, all the incentives right now are built for the bomb throwers who want to make a lot of noise and say the most left wing or right wing things they can say and try to drive the news cycle that way.
Well, and they're also egged on. They're fueled by people who do what I do for a living, who I think carry great sway over primary audiences that two like you need to be concerned about, because if all of a sudden you anger that echo chamber, you're going to draw an opponent in a primary and get all bogged down with having to raise money to defend yourself. Congressman Fitzpatrick, okay, so you told us what has been the position of the group and the success that you had with regard to January 6th. How about the subject of COVID?
Yeah. So another example, Josh and I just introduced a bill. It's called the Made in America Emergency Preparedness Act. There hopefully have been a lot of lessons learned from COVID-19. One of the first lessons I think we all saw up close and personal was how diminished and dwindling our supply chain has been and is with regard to PPE, respirators, ventilators, raw precursor materials to life-saving and life-sustaining pharmaceuticals, by and large, most of which are overseas. That's a national security issue. You know, God forbid we ever encounter any type of situation like this again. We never want to be dependent upon a foreign country or foreign countries to supply us with things that we need literally to survive, including our frontline healthcare workers, our first responders, and the like. So we both provide a carrot and a stick to incentivize the reconstitution of supply chain of these critical pieces of equipment and materials and pharmaceuticals back to the United States. And, you know, Josh and I introduced it together, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, all members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, you know, and that gives it instant credibility, we believe.
Congressman Gottheimer, how about the subject of the origin of COVID? To me, it seems like an issue emblematic of what the three of us are discussing, insofar as President Trump had thoughts on the subject, and I maintain people immediately then suited up in their usual partisan armor. Well, if he's saying it, I'm against it. Or if he's saying it, I guess I have to be for it. I mean, look, a broken clock is right twice a day. It turns out that there's something there at least worthy of exploration and investigation, right?
100%. And that's, what Brian and I are working on together. And part of this, our legislative effort here, is to get this independent commission going to actually take a look at what happened. And, many of us suspect that China is not exactly telling the truth here of their involvement and where the origins were. Where did this come from? Was it in a lab? We have to get to the bottom of it. It's why I think President Biden issued an executive order in the last week or so asking the intelligence community to report back to him on any findings of the origin. This is something that our country has suffered and the world has suffered in a horrific way over the last year or so. And so many family members lost lives and loved ones and other lives have been so affected. We deserve to get to the bottom of this. And we're not going to listen to the WHO on what their position is. We should get to, the United States should draw its own conclusions. That's the least we can do for the country.
Quick final question for both of you, and thank you for being so gracious with your time. A group of scholars in the realm of democracy, published a letter this week, and they said that our entire democracy is now at risk. Congressman Fitzpatrick, do you agree that our entire democracy is at risk because of recent events?
Well, you're a product of the Philadelphia region, Michael, and we all know the story about Benjamin Franklin emerging from the Constitutional Convention and the paperboy coming up saying, "What type of government have you given us?" And he said, "A republic as long as you can keep it." Our democracy is constantly being tested. And that's why Josh and I believe that the work that we're doing is so incredibly important. Democracy is only one generation away from extinction. We have to make sure that we're very, very cognizant about voting rights, about voting integrity, both. And we got to make sure that we're very vigilant on things that you mentioned, like COVID and China and immigration and police reform, all these things that are very, very hot button issues right now. Because I always believe, Michael, and I know Josh agrees, that leaders have 2 qualities. Number 1, they lower the volume and the temperature of the discourse. And number 2, they bridge the gap between differences. And where our democracy becomes at risk is if people lose faith in our institutions, if we lose faith in our elections, and if we start attacking each other and turning against each other. And I put an op-ed out a couple of days ago that talks about China and some of their intelligence mechanisms of soft sabotage, their whole of government approach, attacking what they call the 5 spheres of influence of Americans and how we think. We have to be very cognizant of that and not fall into that trap.
Congressman Gottheimer, I'm worried as one who's paid attention for 3 decades. Never before in my adult life have I worried that the whole thing could collapse. How about you?
Well, just adding to what Brian said about Benjamin Franklin, and at the end of the Constitutional Convention, someone came up and said, "Is the sun setting or rising on America?" And he said, "I see a rising sun." And that's how I feel about our country. I'm very optimistic. Our best days are ahead of us. We've pulled off a miraculous thing where we got to a vaccine in less than a year. Our economy, I think, and thanks to the work of a lot of people in a bipartisan way, got through a tough time. And we're gonna have our best. I just believe, Michael, at the end of the day, our best days are ahead of us. Are we gonna have bumps? Yes, we always have bumps as a country, and we're always perfecting our union. But I know that we will get through this. We have to keep our eyes on the prize, and that's what we're gonna do here. The Problem Solvers Caucus, Michael, is to me the breath of fresh air that we need, because it is the hope of people actually being able to work together to address COVID, to address infrastructure, to address police reform, you name it. This is the way that we have to do it. And if we get back to that, there's nothing we can't do.
Please keep me in the loop, because I answer the telephone for a living. That's really what I do. 15 hours a week, I answer the telephone from callers all across America who are not the type represented by the polar extremes. And I know it will hearten them to hear voices like yours and to know that there is this caucus in the Congress, which just doesn't get the kind of attention that it should, because you're not flamethrowers. But I really appreciate your work, and I thank you so much for your willingness to come by and discuss it. So, Congressman Fitzpatrick, thank you so much. Congressman Gottheimer, I really appreciate making your acquaintance.
An honor, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Michael.